Welcome to another edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Matt Allen, editor of DadsDivorce.com. Today's guest is Dr. Charles Corry, one of the leading researchers of domestic violence against men and president of the Equal Justice Foundation. So Charles, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, first off, could you talk a little bit about primary aggressor laws, explain it, and sort of let our viewers know why people view it as being unfair towards men?
Back when they passed these draconian domestic violence laws, usually in the early 1990s, what happened was that police and frontline police officers are usually pretty fair, usually have a pretty strong sense of justice. And the police would go to a domestic call, and they'd find that the couple typically was fighting. Both of them were fighting mutual combat, and they'd either arrest the woman who they found was the one that got it all started, and a lot of times it was just the female being aggressive, or worse yet, from the radical feminist standpoint, the police would arrest both of them, the man and the woman. Well, the feminists didn't like that, so they said, well, the man is the bigger one, and he should be the one that's being arrested, because women, in their dogma, only hit in self-defense.
Right.
Nonsense, of course, but that was the take on it. So they went back and they got primary aggressor laws passed to try and ensure that the police only arrested men in these situations. And the criteria that they set up typically don't favor arresting the female. So in most cases, they are unfair to men, but the police a lot of times still arrest the females. Here, in Colorado, females are in the domestic arrests are 23% of the all arrests. Here in El Paso County, runs upwards of 25%.
Uh-huh.
So the primary aggressor laws are there. They are biased against men, but they don't work to the satisfaction of the radical feminists because there's still a lot more women getting arrested. Before they passed those laws, about 95% of the arrests were of men, and only about 5% were females.
Wow.
But with the primary aggressor laws in, they've actually 4 or 5 times more women being arrested than there were before.
Now, you mentioned this sort of myth out there that women only hit men in self-defense. Could you talk about other reasons you found in your research for why a woman would hit a man?
Well, there are any number of reasons. Usually there's some mental health problems involved. Borderline personality disorder is a very common one. Bipolar is very similar to borderline personality and can go over to where they get in their manic phase, they will become violent. Some women are just sociopaths. You know, on average, there are as many crazy women as crazy men, and women go insane as frequently as men. So when that happens, you're going to have some violence in many cases. When it's mutual combat, the studies show that 60% of the time it's the women that initiate the violence.
Now, if the women are initiating the violence, I'd assume the men are sort of in this catch-22 about, hitting a woman back. When a man is being hit, what are his options?
Well, what we advise is leave if they can. What happens, though, a lot of times is the woman will block the entrance so that he can't leave because she wants to keep fighting. And if he pushes her out of the way, he's considered violence. Now, in the reverse situation, if he won't let her go because he wants to continue the argument, then he gets charged with false imprisonment. But we've seen a number of cases where women are being charged with false imprisonment as well for blocking exits. You're certainly entitled to self-defense. That can be kind of hard to prove.
Right.
But nonetheless, if she's got a weapon of some sort, or if she continues hitting you and you're trying to escape, or you were asleep when she started hitting you, which is common. Women like to use surprise when they attack men because offsets the size difference. And size difference isn't always an issue because these days a lot of women far outweigh their partners, husbands or boyfriends. So, if she's much bigger than he is, then, the man is much easier to prove self-defense.
Well, finally, could you talk a little bit about your research and perhaps some of the most surprising findings you came across, or some of the largest myths about domestic violence against men that you were able to sort of debunk?
First off, the passage of the domestic violence laws, the biggest factor that we've been able to measure is that people quit calling 911 in domestic disturbances. That dropped radically. I substantiated it first here in Colorado Springs. That's been substantiated in, I think, now 3 other cities. Time after time, I've heard people say, I'll never call 911 again for any reason.
Uh-huh.
And it's probably the people that need help the most that won't call. The other thing that we've stopped here, at least locally, or greatly reduced, is the number of people taking a plea bargain. We've reduced that here from the year 2000. It was 60% of the DV cases were taking a plea bargain. In 2008, it had dropped to 28%.
Wow.
And another finding from that is if you take the case to a jury trial, if you've got competent criminal defense attorney, and finding one of those is always a trick, then the chances of your being convicted are just almost nil, less than 1%. If you just demand the jury trial and plead not guilty, there's about a 90% chance, at least here in Colorado, that the case will be dismissed before trial.
Huh. Well, how did you get involved in domestic violence against men research?
About 15 years ago, my then wife went violently insane. And after I got through all of the nonsense, I had to go through a jury trial. I was acquitted. 6 hours later, the sheriff's deputies were back on my doorstep with restraining order. Got that dismissed in Jefferson County here in Colorado. She moved up to Boulder and got another restraining order. That was finally dismissed. And after I got through all of that, then I sued her for abusive process, outrageous conduct because she stalked me for 5 years, breach of fiduciary duty, and something else. Malicious prosecution. Of course, I lost, but that woke me up to the problems with the justice system, and also I spent $160,000 in legal fees,
Wow.
which isn't uncommon. We've now hear commonly that men spend over $100,000 defending themselves. $500,000 isn't unusual. Once I got through that, settled out for a couple years, PTSD settled down, and virtually everyone who goes through this suffers from some level of PTSD.
Uh-huh.
Then I started writing about it, and then people started writing us and writing me about what they'd encountered. I started off with what I'd seen, and then people started adding to it. And a lot of it is just taking what people write us and publishing their stories a lot of times whenever I can, and putting the bits and pieces together.
Well, I want to thank you for taking your personal experience and turning into advocacy research for this topic that unfortunately a lot of men have to deal with. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
That was Dr. Charles Corry, one of the leading researchers for domestic violence against men and president of the Equal Justice Foundation. That'll do it for this edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Matt Allen, editor of DadsDivorce.com.